Black gunpowder, a charcoal, sulfur, and saltpeter concoction, was invented sometime during the 11 or 1200s AD. Contrary to popular belief, it did not immediately revolutionize the art of warfare. Man required many years to learn how to harness gunpowder for military use. The first gunpowder weapons were nothing more than tubes tied to a piece of wood. By the 1500s, these had evolved into the matchlock musket or arquebus. Our sample today is a reproduction Swedish matchlock of the 30 Years' War. Its bore has been made smaller than the original so as to increase the thickness and strength of the barrel walls. However, it will suffice for our teaching purposes today. The average matchlock weighed between 15 and 30 pounds and was fired from a forked rest. They generally were not configured for shouldering and aiming as a rifle is made today. The name matchlock is quite descriptive of its method of ignition. A touch hole was drilled through to the interior of the barrel, and a pan mounted outside the barrel just underneath the touch hole. After loading the weapon, the pan was filled with powder, and a burning match, a cotton rope soaked in potassium nitrate solution, was placed in a holder above the pan. When the trigger was pulled, it acted as a lever, forcing the match into the pan. The loading procedure was slow and cumbersome. First, the soldier stuck his rest in the ground and hung his burning match over the rest or wrapped it around his helmet. He then poured the propelling charge down the barrel. In the early 1500s, this powder was simply scooped up by hand from a bag of loose powder carried on the belt. By the late 1500s, powder horns were in use, and the powder was poured into a measuring cup and then poured down the barrel. By the time of the 30 Years' War, Gustavus Adolphus had instituted the use of the bandolier. This bandolier was a belt slung over the shoulder from which a number of wooden powder bottles were suspended. Each of these bottles contained one propelling charge. After pouring the powder down the barrel, the shooter then placed a ball in the muzzle of the barrel, withdrew the ramrod, and forced the ball down against the powder. The ball was normally cast a great deal undersized so that the weapon might be easily loaded after the barrel had become fouled by the residue of the black powder. The shooter then brought the weapon level, placed it in the rest, and put a good deal of priming powder in the pan. Prudent shooters would then close some sort of cover over the top of the pan, place the match back in its holder, and were prepared to fire. From this point forward, the weapon had to be kept basically level, especially after the pan was uncovered, and the shooter had to blow upon the match to ensure that it was burning brightly. The weapon had many weaknesses. Thanks to the gap between barrel and ball, it was hopelessly inaccurate. Matchlock musketeers, if left unsupported, could be rapidly overrun. Consequently, they had to be used in conjunction with pikemen. It was the pikeman who provided the close-in defense and the time for the matchlock musketeer to load and use his weapon. The resulting formations of pikemen were often slow and ponderous, like the Spanish tercio, but the musketeer had to stay within the formation of pikemen if he was to survive. During the 30 Years' War, Gustavus Adolphus instituted many improvements in the matchlock. He standardized bore sizes, though this is not standardized as we know it today. He simply designated a range of bore sizes and then had a large number of well-undersized balls cast for them. This allowed the musketeer's assistant, who normally carried lead ingots, bullet molds, and other equipment, to discard this paraphernalia and become a musketeer himself. Further, the bandolier did increase the volume of fire of Gustavus's musketeers. Lastly, Gustavus changed the ratio of musketeers to pikemen. Though he increased the number of pikemen in relation to musketeers, he actually greatly increased the overall volume of fire due to his other improvements. In this photograph, you'll note the musketeers practicing up front, while in the background you can see the dense formations of pikemen. Given this increase in the volume of fire, Gustavus made his units smaller and more maneuverable on the battlefield. In practice, especially with the tercio, it looked like a giant armored hedgehog waddling up to some target and then slowly but surely wearing it away with matchlock fire and jabs of the pike. You are probably asking how this weapon ever came into use. The longbow obviously outranges and outshoots the matchlock. However, you are not considering plate armor. It was the rapidly increasing thickness of plate armor in the late 14 and early 1500s that rendered the longbow relatively obsolescent. Keep watching and you'll see what the matchlock does with the plate armor of our armored horsemelon. Yes, the matchlock certainly had weaknesses when compared to the longbow. You can see that both the volume of fire and the combat range of the matchlock is considerably less than that of the longbow. In fact, its volume of fire is perhaps very generous, as shown on that chart. However, you should keep in mind that no long training period whatsoever was required for the matchlock. This contrasted with the 7-year-plus training required to make a longbowman. Further, by the late 1400s, the longbow was having trouble penetrating the plate armor on the breasts, helmets, and other areas of the armored horsemen. These U.S. Army helmets are a good example. We fired 7 longbow arrows at this helmet trying to get a penetration. Every one ricocheted to include 3 fired inside, either shattering away the front of the arrow, or when we used hardened steel drill rod, bending it. We finally got one longbow arrow to penetrate by firing inside the helmet, and it penetrated that far. The matchlock overcame this problem. If it did not penetrate, then the shock delivered would certainly unhorse the rider and probably do grievous bodily harm. Remember that our sample matchlock fired only a 610 diameter round ball, the exact thing we hit these two helmets with. Most arquebuses and matchlocks of the day fired a ball 40% larger in size with more than double the weight and still at the same velocity. Exactly what we hit this helmet with. Yes, the matchlock may be slow, awkward, and crude, but from the Battle of Pavia in 1515 until the late 1600s, the matchlock, with its protecting pikes close at hand, ruled the battlefield.